Jugs are the best holds you can find. They come in all different shapes and sizes, and they're very easy and intuitive to hold. Typically, beginners can get on jugs right away and climb any climb that has just jugs in them. Mini jugs are also a type of jug. They're a little harder to hold, but they are still jugs because you don't need to crimp them, you don't need to have any special hand movements. You just need to put your hands in there and pull ever so slightly harder. Pinches require a little bit of strength depending on how overhanging the wall is. If it's not overhanging, pinches are basically just ledges and you just need to hang off of them with your hands. If you have to pinch them a bit, pinches require a little bit more strength. Depending on how overhanging your wall is, you might have to engage with your thumb. If you're someone that has smaller hands, it can be helpful to ditch your pointer finger and only use your back 3 fingers to pinch something. This will help you get more distance on the pinch and be able to wrap your whole hand around it and use your thumb. Pinches typically go along with burly climbs or boulders that require a lot of finger strength. Crimps are the one most beginners struggle with when they're starting out. There are 3 ways to crimp a small hold. You can full crimp it like I am here and get your thumb on top of your pointer finger to lock in your crimp. You can do half crimp, which is where you do the exact same thing. You have your fingers at a 90-degree angle, but you don't use your thumb to secure your hand on the crimp. Or you can use open hand grip, where your fingers are extended and you don't use your thumb and you basically drag your fingers on the crimp. Depending on how hard you have to pull on your crimp, that's when you need to decide whether you need a full crimp or you can get away with just an open hand. For me, I like to full crimp at every possible opportunity, but it can be a little risky and it puts a lot of strain on your tendons. Slopers are most people's nemesis. The key with these guys is you want to stay below your sloper at all times. You want to relax, keep your hands firm and engaged, but you want to maximize the amount of friction and surface area your hands have on the sloper. And another way to do that is to brush your slopers and make sure there is enough friction for you to be able to hang off of them nice and relaxed and really sink into them, either to the left or leaning back or just down. Either way, they're very difficult to hold onto, and you'll typically find them on your harder boulders. Side pulls come in all shapes and sizes, and the key with these guys is to stay on one side of them. If you have to transfer from one side pull to another, again, you're trying to make sure you make that transition all the way to the one side in order to get the most out of your side pull. The hardest part about getting into a side pull is just that, getting into it. If you're on one side of a side pull and you have to transfer all the way to another, you'll have to use some special footwork techniques such as drop knee or high foot in order to really press and get all of your body weight to one side. Volumes are super common, especially in modern climbing gyms, and you'll see them all over the place. There's a ton of different ways to hold a volume. You can crimp some of the edges, you can pinch it if it's good enough, you can crimp the edges against the wall, you can put your hand in the screw holes, or you can just press off of them. And in most cases, I'd say you're pressing off of volumes either with your feet or your hands. I'm not gonna lie, I do try to stay away from pockets as much as possible because they can be a little sketchy sometimes when you've got 2 or even just 1 finger in your pocket. It can be a high-risk situation for your tendons. But if you are using pockets, try to put as many fingers in there as possible. It's essentially use like an open hand crimp where your fingers are straight, but you have less fingers to work with. Oftentimes, pockets are also very slopey, so they can just be really bad holds in the first place where you don't have a lot of fingers to hold it with. But every once in a while, you'll get a jug as a pocket, and those are totally okay. When you encounter an undercling, it's gonna feel pretty bad, especially when you're below it. The key with underclings is getting up on top of them as soon as possible. Typically, you'll encounter an undercling and you think you won't be able to hold it. But if you just trust your legs and push up and you get right up so the undercling is actually an undercling and not just some bad pinch that's above you, then you'll get the maximum benefit out of your undercling. You typically won't see speed holds in your climbing gym unless you have a speed wall. Now, every gym in the world has the same set of speed holds, and they're used exclusively on the speed route that is standardized across the world. Sometimes when it comes to dual techs, you just have to ignore it. Like on these holds, for example, they are covered in dual techs and they just have a small portion that is textured. Sometimes you can crimp it and pinch it and grab the dual techs part just for a second or a moment just to stabilize yourself. But the tricky part is when you have to step on dual techs and you really have to trust that glassy lack of friction. Dual techs is very pretty though. Blockers can often turn a really good hold into a really bad or hard to grab hold by blocking some of the good part of the hold, or just making a high risk, explosive, powerful move into a very precise move. For example, you see here, as I push into this hold, I need to be very precise so that I get my fingers right into that slot. Blockers can make an easy climb into a hard one easily. And then we've got the irregular holds, the ones that don't quite fit into one category. For example, this hold is sort of like a ledge, like a flat edge. It's also a sloper. It's got some dual techs on it. So there's tons of ways to hold them. You can try to crimp the whole thing, just use it as the dual techs and throw your thumb on it. Treat it as a sloper and just be really low on it. Then there's holds like this, where there's really no one place to grab it. With these kind of holds, you try to just find the good enough spot. You can spend hours just trying to find the nicest place to hold a hold like this, but in the end, if you find something that's good enough, just go with it. On these kinds of holds, I like to find a little bit of a crimp or a pinch on it and just go with that. And of course, sometimes foot chips can also be hands, so don't overlook a foot chip if you think you can crimp it. Speaking of crimps, sometimes crimps are also pinches, and in that case, it means you can't full crimp it, or at least better to pinch it in addition to crimping it on top. For holds like this, I also like to use a different kind of claw grip where I throw my whole thumb on it and I kind of pinch with the side of my thumb to get more friction. Oftentimes, combining a sloper and a jug can create something kind of in between. Not that good, but also not that bad. And then there's weird holds like this, where you don't know whether to pinch it or just hang down off of it, or maybe you can throw a meat hook. It's really hard because there are so many climbing holds out there. It isn't one size fits all for every hold type. So you really have to evaluate what hold is in front of you and find the best way to hold it by being creative and thinking outside the box.